Today I want to concentrate on our reading from John's Gospel and to highlight in the first instance the beginning of the passage we read, which is not found in any of the other Gospels. That's the story of the Greeks coming to Philip and asking if they could speak to Jesus. It's quite important that it appears in the fourth Gospel because this is the one Gospel written in such a way as to present the truth of Christianity to the Greeks in a way that they could appreciate and understand. It would not have been unusual to find the Greeks in Jerusalem at the Passover, as they loved to travel and learn of other cultures and beliefs. But more than that, they were seekers of the truth. It's been asked how and why these Greeks had heard of Jesus and actually came to seek him out. Well, it was in the last week of his ministry that Jesus cleansed the temple courts and swept the money changers and the sellers of doves out of the temple court. Certainly, they would have heard talk of such a thing happening, and may even have witnessed it for themselves, leading them to want to know more about this man Jesus. However that may be, this is one of the great moments of the story, for here is the first faint hint of a gospel which is to go out to all the world. They came to Philip and he didn't know what to do, and so he asked Andrew. And Andrew had long since discovered that no one could ever be a nuisance to Jesus. He knew that Jesus would never turn any seeking soul away. And as we move through the passage and we hear Jesus say, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified," and he goes on to talk about wheat falling to the ground and dying, loving life and losing it, and so on. Hardly any passage in the New Testament would come with such a shock to those who heard it for the first time as this. It begins with a saying everyone would expect, and it finishes with a series of sayings which were the last things anyone would expect. "The hour has come," began Jesus, "when the Son of Man should be glorified." It was quite clear that things had been building up to a crisis, and that crisis had now come. But Jesus' idea of what that crisis involved was quite different from anyone else's. When he talked about the Son of Man, he didn't mean what other people meant. Now, to understand the shocking nature of this part of our reading, we need to try and grasp something of what the Jews meant by the Son of Man, and to do that, we need to look at the book of Daniel. The term Son of Man took its origin in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. In that passage, the Authorised Version actually mistranslates. It has it that one like unto the Son of Man came to the ancient days, and received a kingdom, a glory, and a dominion that were to be universal and forever. The correct translation, however, is not the Son of Man, but a Son of Man, as the Revised Standard Version has it. And the point of the passage is this. In Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 to 8, the writer has been describing the world powers which have held sway. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians. They were so cruel, so savage, so sadistic, that they could be described only under the imagery of wild beasts, bears, lions, eagles and tigers. These were the symbols of the powers which had, up till then, been in power. It was a dream of the seer, however, that into the world was going to come a new power, and that power was to be gentle and humane and gracious, so that it could be depicted under the symbol not of savage beasts, but of a man. And this part of our reading from the Gospel is essentially saying that the day of savagery would pass and the day of humanity was coming. That was the dream of the Jews, the golden age, when life would be sweet and they would be masters of the world. But how was that age to come? It became clear to them that their nation was so small and their power so weak that the golden age would never come by human means and human power. It must come by the direct intervention of God. To the Jews, The Son of Man stood for the undefeatable world conqueror sent by God. So Jesus says, the hour has come when the Son of Man must be glorified. When he said that, his listeners would certainly have caught their breath. They would have believed that the trumpet call of eternity had sounded, that the might of heaven was on the march, and that the campaign for victory was on the move. But Jesus did not mean by glorified what they understood. They meant that the subjected kingdoms of the earth would grovel before the conqueror's feet. By glorified, Jesus meant crucified. When the Son of Man was mentioned, they thought of his conquest of the armies of God. Jesus meant the conquest of the cross. The first sentence Jesus spoke would excite the hearts of those who heard it. Then began a succession of sayings which must have left them staggered and bewildered by their sheer incredibility. For he spoke not in terms of conquest, but in terms of sacrifice and death. You know, we will never understand Jesus nor the attitude of the Jews to him until we understand how he turned our ideas upside down, replacing a dream of conquest with a vision of the cross. And no wonder they didn't understand him. The tragedy is that they refused to even try. So, what was this amazing paradox that Jesus was teaching? He was saying three things which are all variations of one central truth and all at the heart of the Christian faith and life. Firstly, he was saying that only by death comes life. The grain of wheat was ineffective and unfruitful so long as it was preserved, as it were, in safety and security. It was when it was thrown into the ground and covered over that it grew and bore fruit. It was by the death of the martyrs that the church grew. In the famous phrase, the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. It's always because people have been prepared to die that the great things and truths have lived. But, and I want you to pay attention to this, it becomes much more personal than that. It is sometimes only when people bury their personal aims and ambitions that we begin to be of any real use to God. Cosmo Lang became Archbishop of Canterbury. At one time he had great worldly ambitions, but a godly friend's influence led him to abandon these and to enter the Church of England. One day he was praying and he heard a voice telling him he was wanted. At that point, when he gave up all thought of personal gain, that he became truly useful to God. By the death of our personal ambition, we too become useful to God. Jesus was saying that only by spending life can we keep it. When Joan of Arc knew that her enemies were strong and her time was short, she prayed to God, "I shall only last a year. Use me as you can." Jesus was also saying that only by service comes greatness. The people whom the world remembers with love are the people who serve others. And sadly, it's all too true that in the modern world the idea of service is in danger of being lost. So many are only out for what they can get. Yes, they may well become rich, but they will never be loved, and love is the true wealth of life. Jesus came to the Jews with a new view of life. They looked on glory as conquest, the acquisition of power, the right to rule. Jesus looked on it as a cross. He taught us that only by death comes life, that only by spending life do we keep it, that only by service comes greatness. And the extraordinary thing is that when we come to think of it, Christ's paradox is nothing other than good old-fashioned common sense.